First, the arrest of Telegram founder Pavel Durov. Now, the ban on Twitter in Brazil. After years of making outrage and tribalism their business model, are tech titans getting their comeuppance? We'll ask about the almighty showdown between the billionaire owner of the social medium now known as X and the Chief Justice of Brazil's Supreme Court, who's extended that ban to VPN systems that try to flout the ruling. Alexander de Moraes just notched an important win, what with Musk's Starlink satellite system relenting on initial plans to defy the Twitter ban in Brazil. There's the broader question of how to make a digital public square that extends beyond just echo chambers without peddling hate and disinformation. Musk's own timelines become the bullhorn of a billionaire tycoon who these days targets taxes and immigrants. Donald Trump's now promised him a role auditing the U.S. government if the Republicans win in November. In an age where so much wealth is concentrated in the hands of so few, what are the limits to one man's powers? Today in the France 24 debate, Brazil taking on Elon Musk. And joining us from Rio de Janeiro, journalist Laura Martins, editor of IT Forum. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, guys.
Tech entrepreneur Tariq Krim, the founder of fintech company Cybernetica, is with us.
Guys, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not hearing you.
You're not hearing us. Okay, we'll try to reconnect then with to make sure that is fixed ASAP. Jérôme Barbier is advisor to tech consultants Convergence. Thank you for being with us.
A pleasure to be with you.
And from Erquy on the northwest Brittany coast of France, a member of several blue ribbon panels on tech regulation here in France, Valérie Laure Benabou, law professor at the University of Versailles. Welcome to the show. If you're on the go, by the way, you can listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. With Starlink's assets in Brazil frozen, Elon Musk reversing course in the last 24 hours, taking X, formerly Twitter, off his satellite service there. But if he's lost one battle, he's still fighting the war, calling on Brazilians, for instance, to march this coming Saturday in Independence Day protests. Charlotte Hughes has more on this showdown.
With more than 20 million users, it's X's sixth biggest market globally, according to Statista. But in Brazil, the platform formerly known as Twitter has not been available for several days after a ban ordered by Justice Alexandre de Moraes, a move strongly denounced by billionaire Elon Musk, the owner of the social network.
Free speech is the bedrock of democracy, and an unelected pseudo-judge in Brazil is destroying it for political purposes.
Moraes, whose supporters view him as a leading figure in the defence of democracy, described Musk as an outlaw who enabled the, quote, massive spread of disinformation.
This platform allows the mass dissemination of fake news, hate speech, and attacks on the rule of law. This violates voters' freedom of choice by distancing them from credible information.
Brazil's President Lula voiced support for the judge's decision, saying it may have sent a, quote, signal that the world is not obliged to put up with Musk's far-right ideology just because he is rich. In the wake of the January the 8th, 2023 riots, which saw tens of thousands of Bolsonaro supporters storm institutions including Congress, Moraes began ordering platforms to take down posts by those he accused of spreading disinformation and posing a threat to democracy. Measures that Elon Musk refused to take, resulting in court fines that X has yet to pay. Moraes later gave X a cut-off date for appointing a new legal representative in Brazil, ordering the ban when the platform missed the deadline. A ban upheld by a Supreme Court panel on Monday. It's to remain in place until the platform names a new legal representative and pays outstanding fines.
Tariq Krim, you surprised by this ban?
You mean the Twitter in Brazil? Not really. I mean, historically, Brazil has been very protective. For example, when you're born to sell computers in Brazil, most of the part have to be done in-house. So what we're looking right now is very interesting. You know, the theory of the splinternet, the idea that we have and part of the internet that is US controlled and the other part that is Chinese controlled with TikTok. But now you can see there's a new rise of unaligned countries Look at what happened in India, who decided to block TikTok. And if you look at Brazil right now as well, trying to emerge and say, well, you know what, we will have our own rules and you will follow our rules. So you can see that in some ways, what we see in India and in Brazil is what Europe is not able to do for the moment. It's being tough on the rules. If you want to operate in our country, these are the rules, and you have to follow them.
These are the rules. Are these rules of regulation, or is it, as Elon Musk says, a political vendetta?
I think what's funny is when he's very selective. Some countries, Elon Musk has a lot of ties with China because of the Tesla. So some countries ask him for favors. He's quite obedient. And some countries are not seen as, real countries for him. So what we're seeing here is a lesson that basically the internet is not a global thing anymore. It's been fragmented, and we're going to see different regions. Like if you look at the EU, right now you have to follow the EU rules, like the GDPR, the AI Act. In Brazil, you have to follow whatever the constitution is. In the US, it's more free. You have Section 230 and a bunch of things that allows you to be, have a certain freedom of speech. And in China, basically, none of these applications work. So we have a multilateral, very fragmented world at the moment.
Jérôme Barbier, you just heard Tariq say that Brazil's doing what the EU can't.
I agree, actually. I would say that Brazil is taking the shots for all of us, basically, because it's a democratic country, maybe a flawed democracy, but it's not a decision by a political government or a government at all. Like, it's not the case. In India, it was the case. Like, it was the government which blocked TikTok through politically appointed regulators. Here is the Supreme Court. So I see the surprise because the Brazilian Supreme Court has very important powers compared to other democracies. But the point is that they're just saying we have a regulation nationally and you need to obey by it. And usually the way the debate is shaped around that is quite interesting. Moderation and content moderation has been a tough question for democracy internationally. Historically speaking, the US and the EU didn't want to discuss about that at the UN or in any initial debate, precisely because there is a very thin balance between freedom of speech and protecting citizens' rights. The decision made by Brazil here is first and foremost made because Elon Musk refused to comply with some court orders when it came to shutting down some accounts that were proven to spread disinformation. And we only have this ban because Twitter refuses to comply with the law, which supposedly should be the thing that everyone focuses upon. Like you have a company who says, I can decide on myself and I will not obey a democratically elected government and its regulation.
We can now cross to Laura Martins, who's in Rio. Laura, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, now it's fine. Sorry, guy. I had a little
So first off, let me ask you, when you try to type in x.com today, what are you getting where you are right now?
Almost nothing, but I really use X on my cell phone. It's really bad because I just have like the same post for the last 5 days and it's a meme. So I'm trying like 5 days, 2,000 times to use this application and it's kind of impossible. So we are in Brazil kind of like drug addicts without our drugs. But yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest markets for the social medium formerly known as Twitter. Let me ask you, there was also, the Supreme Court didn't just put a ban on Twitter, it also put a ban on using VPNs to get around the law. How's that working?
Oh, so yeah, this is one of the points that most of lawyers are talking about because it's kind of like the basic for all lawyers that, yeah, the ban needs to be pushed in because we tried it before other things on Elon Musk and Twitter. But the VPN thing is first. It is impossible to talk with all Brazilians and to subpoena all Brazilians. So in theory, they are not allowed to put this text for them. And also, all VPN traffic is encrypted. So it's kind of impossible to really know who is using or not VPNs. I personally don't know any person, but for small companies, they are still using X. Like we have these 4 big telecom companies and it's blocked. We had a kind of problem with Starlink. They said they wouldn't be blocking X. Now they did. Last night they did. But some of Brazilians who use like small telecom companies say that it's still available. I don't know how much this is true of it's just like Brazilians saying things on internet to put other people down.
If they don't have Twitter, where are they saying it?
Instagram and Blue Sky. Blue Sky is getting really huge in Brazil after Twitter is gone, which is kind of interesting because Blue Sky doesn't have a jury representative in Brazil. So it's like, okay, YX cannot be in Brazil without that, but Blue Sky can do it. But in Brazil, it's just because Blue Sky is pretty small and they don't have any problems with the law in Brazil. So probably the Supreme Court in the next months, if this is really been a really big platform in Brazil, they would ask the same for Blue Sky or any other platform that try to come after Twitter.
And one final question on this, Laura. What are people saying about Elon Musk calling on people to come out and demonstrate Saturday on Independence Day?
Oh, yeah, we have, I guess, all world kind of now is the same political issues about the right wings and we have the left. So people who is from the right wings are really supporting Elon Musk. Actually, I was talking with a lot of researchers in Brazil, and they are talking about Elon Musk being an activist for right wings in Brazil and all of the world. So yeah, for people who really support this political, it's like one moment to try to say that we are in a dictator or this is something that Alexander did alone. But for the other half, is just like, yeah, this is the law. We tried to talk with Elon Musk before. He didn't want to do what Brazil needs to. So yeah, we need to ban them. So it's kind of half and half.
It's kind of half and half, according to what your political leaning is. We have Valérie Laure Benabou with us as well. First of all, your reaction to what's happening in Brazil, and in particular, this ban on VPNs.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, fine. It's a huge shock at first sight that a country like Brazil stands for banning a social media, but there has been, as it has been said, a lot of warning before this decision, and Elon Musk decided not to consider that the network was infringing the law. So I'm not so surprised that at the end of the day, the Supreme Court decided to say you have to respect the law because you had several means of complying to our requirement, and you decided to ignore each of them. Therefore, it's something that may be spectacular, but at the end of the day, it's a country that tried to respect its own sovereignty and rules on that should be applicable on its territory. The problem is that with Elon Musk and the so-called libertarian way of thinking, freedom of speech has no limit, but also the incomes of X has no limit. So we clearly know that the freedom of expression argument is being used again and again by tech giants to foster their business. So we shall not be too naive about that, which is it's not only defending the freedom of speech, it's foremost it's defending its own business.
Tariq Krim, let me bring in Tariq Krim on this. When you think back to the early days of the internet, this making profits in the name of absolutist freedom of speech, was that the original? Did you see that's what would come down the pipeline?
I don't think so. I think the internet has changed a lot. I think it's more about, first of all, there's a difference between freedom of speech, being able to say something, and freedom of reach. The fact that someone with some toxic content would be exposed to millions of people. Sometimes the toxic person being Elon Musk himself, with like, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of followers. But what I think is interesting is in the very early days of the internet, these communication platform used to be open. They were open protocols. They were not even sold. You could use IRC and things like that. And suddenly, after decades, we started having privatized. I mean, I think it started with ICQ and AOL, and then Microsoft, and then Facebook, and now these are privatized personal communication. It means that your personal communication are privatized. And I think when you look at what happened with the Telegram story, it's fascinating at many levels, but it summarizes exactly the problems we have today. There's kind of three type of layers. The first one is the geopolitical one, access to the information, that intelligence from every country wants to know what the Russian or the Ukrainian, etc. So that's one layer. The second one is, of course, every government is trying to seduce every players. Every time Elon Musk comes here, it's like a dignitary is received with all the honors, and we're trying to have them as much as they were like state personalities. And the last one is very interesting, is the question of moderation. It's less a free speech question than a moderation question. When you look at Telegram, imagine if each of us, 40 people, we bring our friends, we're 40 people in this room, and we will manage 900 million people. It's impossible. And what Elon Musk did just after buying Twitter, he said, oh, you know what, moderation costs too much. Let's get rid of the people. I think Twitter was not perfect, but had an incredibly strong team and found the right balance. And the problem is you cannot operate continent size, a number of people with very limited resources. And that's the problem, I think.
And you mentioned earlier, Jérôme Barbier, how Twitter's founder, Jack Dorsey, he's now got his own social media app called Blue Sky. He claims that there's been 500,000 new users in Brazil in the first 48 hours since the ban. But then you heard Laura say how they don't even have a legal presence in Brazil. So it's just the same problem, whatever the social media platform is?
I mean, for sure, every single social media that actually have a moderation problem with the different governments, the question is how they do implement it. And you also have a very huge difference according to the size of the number of users per platform. So the priority for Brazil at the moment is to regulate Twitter. Is the same for the other platforms. What we could say about Blue Sky is that when Jack Dorsey founded and handled Twitter, which was still Twitter at the time, Twitter was actually the best student when it comes to content moderation. They had a very careful approach to content moderation. They put a lot of regulations and procedures internally. They actually themselves acknowledged the problems they had, especially the fact that for content moderation, you need to have moderator in every single languages. But the reality is that Twitter, and X even more now that they fired a lot of the people in the content moderation team, mostly moderated content in English, which presents significant risk for a lot of non-English languages, especially, for instance, in territories where there were high intensity conflict. So this is a problem for every single platform. The question is, how do they react? And to my best knowledge, the difference you have with the different platforms, I mean, with X, that is led at the moment by Elon Musk, that you can actually see, because I also work on outer space with the companies that Musk lead, is that he has a very conflicting behavior towards government and government authorities, and the idea that government is illegitimate.
So we have, for instance, breaking news out of California. Twitter, X, has won an appeal to partially block a law in California that requires social media companies to publish their policies for combating disinformation.
Well, I didn't read the decision, so I can't comment any further, but this is a good point that was mentioned also by Tariq. Internet is global, and the inspiration of the founders of the internet was to have a free space that connects everyone worldwide without government intervention and without borders. The reality is that each government is legitimate to regulate its own sphere. And the problems you have, and you have a lot of these issues at the UN, is how do you ensure that you have a minimum understanding between governments for virtual space that is basically global, in which it's very difficult to have a border, but you actually need to have that. So in the US, this decision may be not surprising considering the very large conception of free speech that the United States have. There is the First Amendment. It's very difficult to regulate it. Brazil has a different approach that also comes from a more, I would say, Latin traditions when it comes to regulation that you also have in France.
Laura Martens, in Brazil, you have the same problem on that First Amendment issue that we have here in Europe, which is we don't have the same kind of view to what people can say or not say. And yet there's this sort of Americanization, you could say, of the way we look at public discourse ever since social media rose. Is it the same where you are?
Yeah, exactly. We think more like you guys. We cannot, freedom is not about just talking whatever you want. You need to be responsible for something bad you say or try to do with someone. But I guess Elon Musk's problem is not like that. Trying to go deeper, he couldn't go back with Twitter in Brazil in, I don't know, one day. He just needed to pay it and put on a lower, right? But he's not doing it. We are like 5 days without the platform. And what I think we should be thinking about is like, why? It's not so much money. It's not so hard to try a lower in Brazil. So why he's trying to push so bad in the Brazilian democracy? He's trying to avoid Brazil government. He's trying to be like an influencer for the right wings. So right now, what I'm thinking is just like, why? And what he wants with that. You know, we have Starlink in Brazil as well. So it's kind of like other business, or he's just trying to put Twitter in front of all. I have no idea, but I guess it's more than just being about freedom or this banishment.
Yes, the Starlink satellite system, which arguably, Taïkrim, in terms of geopolitics, is much more important than Tesla or SpaceX because, you know, for instance, we've seen it in the war between Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. Defense Department has had to sometimes tread cautiously when they dealt with Elon Musk.
Yes, in the meantime, we don't really know because obviously Elon Musk is attached to contract with the defense and also the government because he cannot launch a rocket without the government approval. So they are on very specific ground. But what is interesting is that I believe that in some ways the reason Europe is maybe weaker than, let's say, Brazil or other countries is that we need SpaceX right now for our space program. They are going to help us because we didn't invest in our vector of growth. This is because at the end of the day, you can look at this through different perspective. What we see in Europe and is that we used to be the leaders in communication. I mean, in the 90s, France was building one mobile phone out of 3 in the world, and now we build none. We decided to outsource these technologies, and these technologies now are the way we create growth and value. So in some ways, we're a little bit of prisoner of that. We are renting other people's technology. So they have sometimes a say or a caprice, and we have to deal with it. I mean, I would just say the way Elon Musk responded to Thierry Breton on Twitter, something I wouldn't
The Internal
repeat.
Markets Commissioner of the EU.
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't repeat it here. It's unbelievable how disrespectful. But in the same way, they say, well, you need our tools, so I will do the way I want.
Jérôme Barbier, is that true? I mean, I know that the next generation of Ariane rockets is now available. So how dependent is Europe on Elon Musk?
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of actors in the space sector who are quite dependent. SpaceX, of course, is a huge success for the United States, and I would also emphasize that. We often say it's a Musk success story. So SpaceX is also the result of a policy by the United States, which is very important. We are dependent. Ariane 6A is now existing. But in terms of like number of launches, we will need to send a few of the satellites for the IRIS² constellation, which is the constellation that Europe wants to build on the same model than Starlink. We will need to use SpaceX to launch it. And there is another issue, which is also bringing us back to the idea of Twitter and X and how Europe can regulate companies that are headquartered abroad. There is a European space law in discussion. And the big question for Europe is, do we put market access measures, which would say we forbid to any company, even headquartered abroad, that would not respect all requirements to operate within the EU, which would mean that if Starlink do not comply with, for instance, space debris mitigation rules that Europe set, they wouldn't be...
Okay, but then I'm Elon Musk. I say, fine, you can't use our system.
Yes, But the point is that he can do that because financially speaking, for Starlink, it could work actually because they have a lot of defense contracts and there are a lot of other countries that uses it. But for a lot of companies, for instance, Twitter is already not financially sustainable actually. And if they couldn't operate in Europe anymore, I am not sure the company could last for a very long time, which is also the issue with Brazil. Musk is very good to shape the debate, saying that actually governments depend on them because they couldn't work without Twitter. Actually, if governments were like, okay, you want to leave us? Leave us. The point is that governance will last. The company needs a market.
Speaking of how much Elon Musk can influence the conversation, back in 2016, it was Musk's co-founder at PayPal, Peter Thiel, who helped Donald Trump win the White House. And while Thiel is yet to commit this time directly to Trump, Musk's pledge to pour $45 million into the Republican nominee's campaign for U.S. president. Trump, who's lavished praise on Musk, even tipped him to be part of a panel to audit the federal government. The latter tweeting in the last day that I can't wait. There's a lot of waste and needless regulation in government that needs to go. Valérie Laure-Benabou, simple question. How powerful is Elon Musk?
Well, I don't know. Actually, I think the guy has a feeling of power which is unlimited. But there is also the reality of the market. I mean, when he bought Twitter, at the first time, all the company that were feeding the gross revenue decided to take a step and decide and think about their announcement and a campaign on X because of the lack of moderation that was mentioned. So I think that there is also this kind of pragmatic dimension, which is it's a businessman, and he should take into account the fact that he runs a service that needs people to feed with money. And I know he has other company, and it's a mix, and it's a cross possibility for him to sustain each of his Starlink and Tesla and so on. But still, if it's not sustainable anymore, because people become aware of the lack of moderation and the risk for them to have their trademarks tarnished by the fact that some horrible things are said on Twitter, they begin to make a step and behind and try maybe to find other ways to communicate. I'm quite surprised that the political person and also the journalists keep on being so present on X, while there are other social medias, there are other ways of communicating that are not requiring to give money and data to Elon Musk. We also need, as citizens, to decide not to be part of this network anymore. For example, I'm not on X anymore. Because I decided not to, and it's something that is quite easy.
That brings up an important point, what you're saying. I want to ask several of the panelists about this because, our show, we're on X, we're on Twitter, because we want to reach a wide audience and not just speak to an echo chamber. So Tariq Krim, is that the right thing to do, or should we be going elsewhere?
It's a good question. I think there's not a lot of choice. It's a lot of the social network are organized by demographics. That's at least that's how they started. TikTok was targeting the super young, Snapchat, the teenagers, Instagram, the millennials, and Facebook older. And in some ways, X is an interesting thing because it's a fantastic tool to access the news. because we can, if you follow the right people, you can have access to an incredible amount of information. But now it's disturbed because you also get all the unwanted, retweets and information, and it plays on this. But it's an echo chamber, but it's also a very limited echo chamber, because then a lot of people know what's going on Twitter, because the media actually post what happens there. And I think it's we are all exhausted. I think it's after years of high intensity, we're starting to understand that these tools are also toxic. So we use them less. We're becoming more, I would say, conscious about their limitations. And one of the things that we didn't talk about is the reason Elon Musk needs Brazil. He needs Portuguese language, because right now the value of Twitter is, as a social network, close to zero, because a lot of the advertisers have left the company. But as an AI data gathering tool, it has or holds a potential enormous value. And he started investing a lot of money into chips. He's got his own models. He's trying to figure out how to create an artificial intelligence that can, work on his way, and he needs a lot of data.
And by the way, he's just agreed in the last 24 hours to comply with European rules when it comes to to gathering data basically hoovering up our personal data for AI.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's the beauty of AI is that you gather data in California or somewhere else where the law is easy, and then the result of the product will be sold everywhere.
So you need those Portuguese speakers for his.
You need these Russian speakers. That's also, by the way, potentially the value of Telegram is that they gathered so much private conversation that it's an incredible tool for training AI. And the value of, we need data. We're running out of data in 2030. So 5 years from now, if there's not enough data, we're talking about including synthetic data. And all these services have an enormous amount of private data. That's another question we have legal expert here. Can we actually use the personal and private data for, teaching AI how to think and learn? That's not a question. There's no doubt in Elon Musk that this is the value.
And Jérôme Barbier, can this be regulated?
Well, it is regulated when it comes to data uses in Europe, and I always find that I work in politics, so I'm very mindful of the wording of every declaration. And as you said, Musk agreed to respect the rules, which is funny. We didn't really ask him. There is a regulation to operate in Europe, and you actually need to comply with it to be able to operate that. The question, if Europe would actually enforce it to the end of it and ban Twitter from existing in Europe, I don't think so, because we have much more check and balances that the Brazilian Supreme Court is very strong. But so yes, we can regulate it. It's not perfect. GDPR, so the
regulation.
Yeah, the general regulation of the EU, already exists. We know it's not really implemented to the best of it, although it settled a clear framework that is globally and helped a lot of even big tech companies headquartered of the US to go in that direction. You also have a much stronger awareness, I would say, between users and a lot more NGOs that are working to see how they do it.
All right, Laura Martins, for a while, again, we've been asking about what is the alternative to Twitter. As the Guardian social media critic found in a recent post, recent article, it's not so easy. He quotes someone as saying, Threads is just deathly dull. And he also finds that very often it feels like a bot because people are just basically reposting whatever they put out on Instagram. So again, it's this question of where do we find that global town square? How do you make it so that they're not hoovering up our private data for profit?
Oh, wow. This is a $1 million question, right? Yeah, it is hard. Instagram tried Threads, I don't know, more 1 year or so. And I don't know in French, but in Brazil it's not so big. Until now, even without Twitter for 5 days. Blue Sky is getting bigger in Brazil, but we also had one time with Ku, with an Indian platform. But then when we had back Twitter, we're just like, okay, we are back in Twitter. But so I guess would be just with them again, if Twitter comes back for Brazil. And I'm so sorry for always saying Twitter, not X, but it's kind of hard until now to say X. And I agree with them. It's hard to have one social media that is kind of well for all population globally and for all generations. They have all this kind of control. So yeah, it's not easy. I don't know if we can manage to have other platform. Even if Brazil would be so strong enough to put people from other countries in new social media just because we don't have X anymore. So
Valérie Laure-Benabou, there was a big push last year towards Mastodon, which is this sort of non-profit thing. That hasn't really taken off. How do you, is it possible to do something that's both open source and not profit and popular and works well?
Yeah, well, this is more a technical answer than a legal answer, I have to say. I think that open source is something that has always been so important for the development of technology, but so difficult to implement for end users. So we are in this paradoxical situation where we really need to have open format, open code in order to have a strong and vivid technology, but it's always a bit complicated for end users to handle those tools. And therefore, that's why the giants of technology have captured for themselves the open source value, whereas privatizing the end user instrument, and this is complicated, and that's why we have some flops. I mean, in this field, whereas it has proven to be more efficient, but it's the network effect doesn't work that well because of the difficulty for users to handle this technology. It's a problem of literacy, of technological literacy, that we could not.
Yeah, it's just harder. It's not as seminal when you use it. It's not as easy. Tariq Krim.
Yeah.
You're meaning Mastodon, right?
Yeah.
I think. Listen, I think the problem in Europe is simply there's 3 layers to control your destiny online. You have the cloud, it's like where the software runs. We don't have any players. The operating system, we don't have any players. I tried 10 years ago. It was very hard to do it in Europe.
Quant, right?
And no, it was called Jolly Cloud, and I did NetVibes. The third thing is the alternative for news, social media. We don't have any of them. If you look at China, China has actually built, they have several operating systems. Every big company has cloud services, and they have TikTok, QQ, they have so many others. They are in control of a destiny. I disagree with the policies and the way it works, but at least they have achieved technical independence. We always believed in Europe that we're going to regulate other people's instead of building our own. And we should focus in Europe to build, same thing in space, same thing in industries. We need to invest in building. Building new platforms can take 5 to 10 years, but it's absolutely necessary. We cannot continue relying on companies that are not only not owned by any of us and have allegiance to other interests, but also are now run by madmen. And so this is a really big question. How do we move toward a technical and digital independence? And that means we need to build things the way we think they should be built, with our own values embedded in them.
Right, which brings us to France's president. Elon Musk's showdown with Brazil follows the August 24th arrest of Telegram founder Pavel Durov in Paris. French authorities, they grew tired of Telegram ignoring their calls to cooperate on illegal activity on the platform. Emmanuel Macron had courted the Russian-born billionaire with a lunch at the palace and citizenship back in 2018 in the hopes that Telegram would relocate to France. Never happened. Still, on a visit to Serbia last week, Macron harbored zero regrets.
Concerning naturalization, it's a decision that we made in 2018, if I recall, and that I take total responsibility for. It was taken in a conscious strategy of allowing women and men, whether they are athletes, performers, entrepreneurs, when they make the effort to learn French and develop wealth and innovation that influences the world, and when they ask for it, to be given French nationality. I did it for Mr. Durov, who made the effort to learn the French language, as I did for Mr. Spiegel, an American entrepreneur, as I did for actors and athletes. I think it's good for our country.
Américain, comme je l'ai fait pour des acteurs, des sportifs, et je pense que c'est bon pour notre pays.
Yeah, Mr. Spiegel, the head of Snapchat. Jérôme Barbier, listening to Tariq Karim's call for European entrepreneurship in this in the field of digital technology, with the French president says, yeah, we're trying to instead entice foreigners. Your thoughts?
Well, I can only join Tariq on that, and particularly as a French citizen that has worked in government several years, I'm of course biased because it's France's long-standing position at the EU. A regulation policy without industrial policy is at least partly failed to be doomed, because at the end of the day, you don't have the means to implement that nationally. So that's a fact. And a very good illustration was that at the early days of Musk's takeover of Twitter, which is now X, and they just shut down the certification process as it was done to replace it by a paying dimension. You could have the blue mark. There was a lot of debates among EU officials and governments to say we need to quit the platform, because it means that basically everyone paying the $8 fee per month could impersonate the account of a government, of a president or someone. And after consideration, no one left Twitter because there was no other place for government and the EU to go and communicate. So they just stayed here and say, okay, we are going to negotiate with Twitter to have another way of certify your accounts. And that is the example of what Tariq just said. Like, if you don't have any alternative, you can go.
Is it a turning point, though? The fact that you've had this showdown in Brazil, this showdown in France, are things changing?
I think it is for governments' willingness to actually implement the regulation, and maybe to go to the conflict with people like Elon Musk in the private sector, and to say we have regulations and we are not just going to wait for the White House and the Congress of the United States to decide the regulation that will be implemented on their companies. However, I would be a bit more pessimistic when it comes to French industrial policy. In some fields it's working. In outer space, some measures have been taken. When it comes to digital policy, it's very difficult for a lot of reasons, including for social media. You have a winner's tax-equal effect. So you need to have like the larger pool of users to be interesting. So it's very difficult to enter the field. And I would say we missed the train some decades ago already for digital policy.
Laura Martens, final word on this, on whether or not this is a turning point or whether this will all go away and Twitter X will be back online soon where you are.
Oh, wow. If it's going back or not, I guess we should ask Elon Musk if he's trying to just go with the laws, the Brazilian laws. But yeah, I guess it's a turning point. I don't know how much this is changing globally, but I guess this shows for big techs, not just for X, but for all big techs, that Brazil and any other countries, we don't need them, and we would banish them and do whatever it takes if it's about our laws. And I guess this is important because people like Elon Musk think that they can just do whatever they want. I'm not sure if I'm so positive about the politicals behind this. If he's losing power of his, like increasing his power after that, I guess we would see more after September 7th, and we can talk again. But yes, I guess it's changing how big techs are looking for countries, especially developing countries, that they normally just look for them. It's like, we can do whatever we want here.
All right, we shall see indeed. Laura Martens, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Rio. Valérie Laure Benabou in Brittany, Tariq Karim, Jérôme Barbier, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.